About the rain. The rain, it's kind of raining outside right now, so that's going to be some background noise in this. Going to be doing chapter 6 of Division 1 of Being in Time. The translation this is the translation that I prefer. What's the name? Yeah, Macquarie. The other one is Stambaugh. Forget which one is which one this one is, but I know that I like this one. I just forget which name it is that I like better. I like Stambaugh better. As we've discussed, as I've discussed a lot, I've discussed it in separate videos and talking about specific concepts, as well as the specific videos about the specific chapters. What's going on here is he's trying to uncover the meaning of being, of course. That's the main thing. He's trying to establish a fundamental ontology of the world and of the self. And he's kind of establishing this unitary phenomenon of design and of being in the world that does include the worldhood, thus includes the world itself. So he's doing a ontology and a hermeneutics of the self. So he's trying to kind of understand the world through understanding the design itself. So he's talked about worldhood. He's talked about being with. He's talked about being in the world, being with. Talked about thrownness, fallenness, understanding, and all those things. And it's kind of leading up to care, because care, being as care, is kind of that which explains. It kind of helps one understand design, because care is a fundamental. Part of design's being. It really is. So I want to go over the things I highlighted and read them and sort of explain what's going on. There are a few parts of this very long chapter that I have left out on purpose. But the first section of this chapter is the question of the primordial totality of design's structural whole. Being in the world is a structure which is primordially and constantly whole. So he's kind of standing back and trying to uncover and understand every single part of it. But it's not like we have all these things, figments, and parts of this whole thing that are apart from each other. It's one whole together. That in this breading, he's standing back and analyzing. To be sure, the constitution of the structural whole and its everyday kind of being at the whole, as such, phenomenologically in a way which is unified. So, but we may look at it more freely, and our unified view of it may be held in readiness more securely if we now raise the question towards which we have been working in our preparatory fundamental analysis of design in general. How is the totality of that structural whole, which we have pointed out to be defined in an existential ontological manner? So he says, design exists factically. Design has a kind of being in which it is brought before itself and becomes disclosed in its thrownness. Thrownness being described as either Befindlichkeit or Geworfenheit, how one finds oneself. Thrownness is how one finds oneself. That's one way of translating Geworfenheit, and also Befindlichkeit. But thrownness as a kind of being belongs to an entity in which each case is its possibility. So design comports itself towards its possibilities, but in a way, and it does projects and it does things which it has concern for, and looks at its situation or its facticity and tries to change things, and tries to make a new potentiality through that stuff. So thrownness, how you find yourself, has to do with your facticity and your potentiality, how you find yourself, plus how you can see yourself through your possibilities, or how you can comport yourself toward your projects to make anew possibilities in your life. Accordingly, Design's average everydayness, and average everydayness has to do with fallen or fallenness, which is basically a immersion of oneself, or the immersion of Design into the world. Can be defined as being in the world, which is falling and disclosed, thrown and projecting, and for which its own most potentiality for being is an issue, both in its being alongside the world and with its being with others. So in that, he kind of explains how its Design's own being can be an issue, and where you have issues of what Sartre would call bad faith, or what he would call inauthenticity, and also angst, is when you're fleeing from yourself, trying to become other than what you are, because of certain issues that become apparent to you in your life via your fallenness and your thrownness. You can basically flee away from yourself, but also fleeing in your own face. It's kind of a complicated thing here, but you can try to deny a part of yourself. Let's say you want to deny, according to Heidegger, that, well, according to Heidegger, other is prior to self. So if you want to deny that other is a part of you in some way or another, you are denying a part of yourself. So he wants to talk about the equiprimordial structure, equiprimordiality of the structure of Dasein. And he says, can Dasein's being be brought out in such a unitary manner that in terms of the essential equiprimordiality of the structures we have pointed out, as well as the existential possibilities of modification, will become intelligible? To put it negatively, it is beyond the question that the totality of the structural whole is not to be reached by building it up out of the elements. On the other hand, Dasein's being is not to be deduced from the idea of man. So that's also like Dasein is his way of explaining man in a way, and also not that way either. It's his way of explaining consciousness, and yet not so. So it's kind of difficult to figure out what he's going for, if he's trying to explain man or consciousness. And the answer would be yes, and also no. Does interpretation of Dasein, which we have hitherto given, permit us to infer what Dasein, from its own standpoint, demands as only appropriate ontological way of access to itself? An understanding of being belongs to Dasein's ontological structure as something that it is disclosed to itself and its being. The way of disclosure in which Dasein brings itself before itself must be such that in it Dasein becomes accessible as simplified in a certain manner. And here comes upon the idea of anxiety. He's talking about how there's ways that Dasein can disclose himself to himself, and also how one can flee from yourself, and that's also a way that you can disclose yourself to yourself, because it's going to cause a lot of problems for you if you try to deny a part of yourself or flee from yourself. As a state of mind which will satisfy these methodological requirements, the phenomenon of anxiety will be made basic for our analysis. Analysis is anxiety is a state of mind or a mood, according to Heidegger. As one of Dasein's possibilities of being, anxiety, together with Dasein itself, as disclosed in it, provides the phenomenal basis for explicitly grasping Dasein's primordial totality of being. Dasein reveals itself as care. So, anxiety and the many states of mind and moods that Dasein can have, the being of those things reveals itself as care. That's how care is locked up in all this here. The way Dasein is a part of the world, the way that Dasein is being with others, the way that Dasein is thrown and fallen, and all these different states of minds that it can have, and how it can have solicitude and all these different things, shows how care defines the being of Dasein. If we are to work out this basic existential phenomenon, we must distinguish it from the phenomenon which might be proximately identified with care, such as will, wish, addiction, and urge. Care cannot be derived from these, since they themselves are founded upon it. So, the analytic of Dasein, which is proceeding towards the phenomenon of care, is to prepare the way for the problematic of fundamental ontology, the question of the meaning of being in general. And the idea of care is at the very root of the meaning of being in general. The meaning of being can be understood, at least in a major way, as to care. And so to understand care in the way that Heidegger explains it, not as a mere urge or anything like that, so not something as minute as that, you are understanding care as a fundamental thing. Concern for anything, whether it be your projects or your possibilities or your facticity or whatever, anything that you can possibly have, anything that you can comport yourself to, and we all as Dasein, as being in the world, us people, we do comport ourselves towards our possibilities and our projects. So I think he has a point here how the question of the meaning of being can be understood in a way by care. Because the ontological problematic of being has heretofore been understood primarily in the sense of presence at hand, while the nature of Dasein's being has remained ontologically undetermined, we need to discuss the ontological interconnections of care, worldhood, readiness to hand, and presence at hand, or reality. This will lead to a more precise characterization of the concept of reality in the context. So he does kind of go on later in this chapter to explain that idea of reality and about how care can reveal in a way reality. It can reveal reality in the world through Dasein and through understanding the meaning of being of Dasein. And section 40 is the basic state of mind of anxiety as a distinctive way in which Dasein is disclosed. So he's using the state of mind of anxiety as a key mood or state of mind as a way to unveil how care works and how care is fundamental in Dasein itself. Dasein's absorption in the they, and the they is otherness. If Dasein can be absorbed in the they, that just means that he's, in a way, denying his individuality. And one is fallen into the they as he is thrown into the world. So one is already, as other is prior to self, one is already fallen in the they, but through the development of oneself, through comporting yourself towards your in the they, but through the development of oneself, through comporting yourself towards your possibilities and all this stuff, you develop a sense of individuality yourself. The they is, if you don't, individuate yourself and become in some way or another apart from the they, then you're in a state of inauthenticity. Dasein's absorption in the they and its absorption in the world of its concern make manifest something like a fleeing of Dasein in the face of itself as an authentic potentiality for being itself. This phenomenon of Dasein fleeing in the face of itself and in the face of its authenticity seems at least a suitable phenomenal basis for the following investigation. Dasein turns away from itself in accordance with its almost inertia of falling. From an existential point of view, the authenticity of being oneself has, of course, been closed off and thrust aside in falling. The To be thus closed off is merely a privation of a disclosedness which manifests itself phenomenally in the fact that Dasign's fleeing is a fleeing in the face of itself. That in the face of which Dasein flees is precisely what Dasein comes up behind. So, sorry, it's kind of hot in here. I should probably turn on the AC. He's just kind of trying to use it to explain anxiety as how you flee away from yourself, and however, at the same token, you're fleeing towards yourself while you're trying to deny or neglect a part of yourself and try to be something else. That's where anxiety comes from. And in that process, your design is disclosed to itself. This existential ontological turning away by reason of its character as a disclosure makes it phenomenally possible to grasp existential ontologically that in the face of which Dasein flees, and to grasp it as such. So, there's a authenticity of being oneself. If you are the opposite of that, then you are in a state of authenticity. And through the state of mind of care or concern, one can end up going against the authentic state of being oneself. And here he's talking more about anxiety and fear. Dasein's falling into the they, and the world of its concern is what we have called the fleeing in the face of itself. Turning away of falling is grounded rather in anxiety, which in turn is what first makes fear possible. So anxiety is primordial to fear, where, like I said many times, fear is like when you see a spider in the tub and you want to kill it because it scares you. You know what's causing that fear, where anxiety is the opposite. You have no idea what's causing it, and you don't know how to immediately stop it. Okay. Accordingly, when something threatening brings itself close, anxiety does not see any definite here or yonder from which it comes. That in the face of which one has anxiety is characterized by the fact that what threatens is nowhere. Anxiety does not know what that in the face of which it is anxious is. Nowhere, however, does not signify nothing. This is where any region lies, and there too lies any disclosedness of the world for essentially spatial being in. Therefore, that which threatens cannot bring itself close from a definite direction within what is close by. It is already there and yet nowhere. It is so close that it is oppressive and stifles one's breath, and yet it is nowhere. In that in the face of which one has anxiety, the it is nothing and nowhere becomes manifest. The obstinacy of the nothing and nowhere within the world means as a phenomenon that the world as such is that in the face of which one has anxiety. And he's kind of correlating being in the world with nothing itself, and that it doesn't mean absolutely nothing. It means the lack of being, and how being in the world you can find within being in the world you can find nothing itself. So if the nothing, that is, the world as such, exhibits itself as that in the face of which one has anxiety, this means that being in the world itself is that in the face of which anxiety is anxious. Being anxious discloses primordially and directly the world as world. Anxiety is not only anxiety in the face of something, but as a state of mind, it is also anxiety about something. That which anxiety is anxious about is being in the world itself. So you have this sort of almost like a conundrum. How being in the world is correlated and almost in a way somewhat identified with nothing. Not identified. Nothing is a part of being in the world. And anxiety is something that does come with having care. It comes with having concern for your projects and your possibilities. Anxiety thus takes away from Dasein the possibility of understanding itself as it falls in terms of the world and the way things have been publicly interpreted. That about which anxiety is anxious reveals itself as that in the face of that of which it is anxious, namely being in the world. Here, the disclosure and the disclosed are existentially self-same in such a way that in the latter the world has been disclosed as world, and being in has been disclosed as a potentiality for being which is individualized, pure and thrown. This makes it plain that with the phenomenon of anxiety, a distinctive state of mind has become a theme for interpretation. In anxiety, one feels uncanny, but here uncanniness also means not being at home. And our first indication of the phenomenal character of Dasein's basic state, and a clarification of the existential meaning of being in, as distinguished from the categorical signification of insideness. Being in was defined as residing alongside, or being familiar with. So he's kind of, like I said, he's kind of trying to understand being as care through looking at and analyzing anxiety as a state of mind. And a state of mind, as you know, we talked about in the previous chapter, is having to do with thrownness, or how one finds oneself. That is a instantiation of thrownness. That's something that is a way that one can be thrown. When Dasein understands uncanniness in the everyday manner, it does so by turning away from it and falling. In this turning away, the not at home gets dimmed down. Yet the everydayness of this fleeing shows phenomenally that anxiety as a basic state of mind belongs to Dasein's essential state of being in the world, which, as one that is existential, is never present at hand, but is itself always in a mode of factical being there. That is, in the mode of a state of mind. From an existential ontological point of view, the not at home must be conceived as the more primordial phenomenon. So he's kind of unloading all this stuff, and I kind of want to find the point here. Ahead of itself, being already in the world essentially includes one's falling and one's being alongside those things right to hand within the world with which one concerns itself. The being of Dasein means ahead of itself being already in the world, as being alongside entities encountered within the world. This being fills in the signification of the term care, which is used in a purely ontological existential manner. From this signification, every tendency of being which one might have in mind ontically, such as worry or carefreeness, is ruled out. Because being in the world is essentially care, being alongside the right to hand can be taken in our previous analyses as concern, and being with the Dasein with of others as we encounter it within the world can be taken as solicitude, or that's ontological care for others. And he kind of, through understanding care and understanding all these things, he kind of unleashes the idea of being free. And being ahead of oneself as being towards one's ownmost potentiality for being lies the existential ontological condition for the possibility of being free, for authentic existential possibilities. To the extent that this being towards its potentiality for being is itself characterized by freedom, Dasein can comport itself towards its possibilities, and even unwillingly it can be inauthentically and factually it is inauthentically, proximally, and for the most part. So freedom comes from the idea that one can comport oneself to your possibilities. You can choose whether to be authentic or inauthentic to yourself. But true freedom is, of course, the true authenticity with yourself. And here he talks about inauthenticity. Even in inauthenticity, design remains essentially ahead of itself, just as design is fleeing in the face of itself as it falls. Still shows that it has the state of being of an entity for which its being is an issue. That's the idea of inauthenticity. Care as a primordial structural totality lies before every factual attitude and situation of design, and it does so existentially a priori. This means that it always lies in them. So any thought or worry or anxiety or fear or anything like that is posterior to care itself. Care is the a priori primordial thing to being. So talking about inauthenticity and authenticity and all these different things, he's kind of showing how care is totally like a primordial and ontological and existential part of being itself and of design. And care also, in a way, can lead you to freedom. Through understanding care, you have design, or you have freedom. From this world, design takes its possibilities, and it does so first in accordance with the way things have been interpreted by the they. This leveling off of design's possibilities to what is proximately at its everyday disposal also results in a dimming down of the possible as such. So, to be inauthentic to oneself would be to dim down a lot of your potentialities and your possibilities. With the expression care, we have in mind a basic existential ontological phenomenon, which all the same is not simple in its structure. The ontological elemental totality of the care structure cannot be traced back to some ontological primal element, just as being certainly cannot be explained in terms of entities. So he's kind of, at this point, he's basically unloaded everything of the care structure. And I'd like to, at some point, sort of explain that in a different video, because I feel like I'm not explaining it that well here. I want to kind of do further videos explaining the care structure. And also, I kind of want to use this, if I could. This is Speaking of the World by Hubert Dreyfus. It's another book I would love to use, because in my opinion, Dreyfus is the best secondary thinker on Heidegger, but that's still kind of hard to do because there are many different thinkers who have probably definitely earned their place as basically one of the best thinkers that are secondary to Heidegger. So then from here, he talks about reality, and I kind of want to explain that in a very brief way, because I don't want to go over it like I did, because I basically wanted to get at that care structure part, which is what I've been reading off and explaining this whole 30-minute video. So he talks about reality, and he talks about how design and being in the world and care all, basically what he's been doing in this whole thing, this whole part of the book. He's been uncovering ontological elements of design, including being in, being with, worldhood, being as care, and all those different kinds of things. There are probably about 1,000,000 different being in the, or, you know, hyphenated words which he has used, which have explained his basically his ontology, explained everything that he has been, you know, it's basically been explaining design and being in the world, explaining and kind of in a way uncovering the meaning of being, and he has in a way explained design and being in the world and man and consciousness in certain ways, but also he's, you know, in that same way, you know, how he explains how design has fallen and thrown in the world, and how they're, and to understand man or design or consciousness, to also understand the world in a real, in an absolutely ontologically real way. He talks about reality and truth in this next one, or in this last part of this section. He talks about reality and truth and how, hold on. He has been explaining kind of reality and truth, and hold on, if I can go back to where I was at, and he's kind of talking about like what the logical positivists have talked about, whether the external world is proved, and he talks about Kant, and I don't really want to go into that. He does say that things outside of us are possible to prove. They are not. They are not impossible to prove, and it's not something that we can take merely on faith. That the existence of things outside of us are not taken merely on faith, and to have faith in the reality of the external world, whether rightly or wrongly, to prove this reality for it, whether adequately or inadequately, to presuppose it, whether explicitly or not, attempts such as these, which have not mastered their own basis or with full transparency, presuppose a subject which is approximately worldless or unsure of its world, and which must at bottom first assure itself of a world. So, in a way, he's kind of talking about how reality and truth are, in a way, that the reality of the world, and thus truth, because of worldhood and because of how, you know, one can uncover the meaning of being through design and being in the world, you can have a assurance of a world, unless you can have assurance of a ontologically real reality and truth. And he does go on talking about Descartes and Kant and lots of other thinkers, but I kind of wanted to mainly get at that care stuff.